Well, thank you very much, Warren, and I as well would like to acknowledge the dancers, the drummers, all of those partaking in the pipe ceremony. I want to thank Elder Armin MacArthur for the prayer here this morning. Elders, survivors, chiefs, distinguished guests, legislative colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to your legislature. Welcome to Treaty 4 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota people, and the home of the Métis. And welcome to our Denny friends with us here this morning. Before I begin, I want to recognize members of the Sixties Scoop Indigenous Society of Saskatchewan who are here with us today. Honored guests, thank you so much for your participation in the process that has brought us to this point on this day. A process that began more than 3 years ago under my predecessor, Premier Brad Wall, who first promised this action, this apology, on June the 24th of 2015. Friends, we would not be here today if it were not for your courage, your determination, and your commitment. We are deeply indebted to you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an important day in the life of our province. This is a day for our government to acknowledge with honesty, with humility, and with deep regret what happened in Saskatchewan. The 60 Scoop refers to a period in Canadian history when Indigenous children were removed from their families and their communities by child welfare services. Thousands of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children were placed in non-Indigenous foster and adoptive homes in Saskatchewan, and in some cases across Canada and the United States. In Saskatchewan at that time, those who managed the foster and adoption programs believed that they had the moral and legal obligation to act. However, during the 60 Scoop, not nearly enough consideration was given to the fact that Indigenous children come from communities with their own rich traditions, their own rich culture and history. Some Indigenous children were separated from their families and their communities, and as a result, those children were cut off from their culture, and they were cut off from their traditions. Despite the good intentions of many foster and adoptive parents, too many of these children were caught between two worlds. They were stranded, in a sense, with no knowledge of who they were or where they came from. The consequences of this are still being felt by individuals and families to this very day. The children impacted by the 60 Scoop are adults now, and we've heard their stories during the last number of months. And we are truly humbled and grateful that they have agreed to share their stories with us. In partnership with our government, the 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Saskatchewan facilitated sharing circles in 6 communities across Saskatchewan: in Meadow Lake, in North Battleford, in Prince Albert, in Saskatoon, in Fort Qu'Appelle, and right here in Regina. More than 200 survivors participated in the sharing circles or made submissions online. And we are grateful for your candor, and we are grateful for your courage, as it is inspiring. Thanks to these brave individuals, we as a province know more about what happened during the 60 Scoop. We've taken an important step in raising public awareness through partnership. And we welcome an ongoing dialogue for those affected by the 60 Scoop and their families, and we build on initiatives underway in government and at our educational institutions, such as the introduction of curriculum in this province that provides a deeper understanding of the history, of the traditions, and of the values of Indigenous people. Today in Saskatchewan, we are more informed than ever of our history. There's a growing awareness of mistakes that were made in the past and why we need to acknowledge those that may have suffered because of those mistakes. We heard from survivors who asked for their historical records from the Ministry of Social Services so that they can find out more about who they are and where they came from, and learn more about their families and their communities. We have worked to fulfill these requests, and we are committed to doing the same into the future. Each of the sharing circles was attended by cabinet ministers as well as members of the Legislative Assembly from the Government of Saskatchewan. In addition, Deputy Premier Gordon Wyant, Social Services Minister Paul Merriman, and Warren Kading, the Minister responsible for First Nations, Métis, and Northern Affairs, all met with survivors on a number of occasions. I myself had the great privilege of meeting with members of the Society, as did the entire government caucus. And in those conversations, in the online submissions, the effects of the 60 Scoop was laid out in great detail. One survivor said this, and I quote, "When I was a child, I was taken, placed, and abused. That's probably why I get so angry. Those things come back in my mind. I try not to think about it, but it is still there. I don't know how to heal myself." End quote. Another survivor said she kept running away from foster homes to go back to her family. But each time she was returned to another foster home. She said, "My sense of security was always temporary. I didn't know my siblings. I met a lot of people who influenced me to start running with the gang lifestyle." A third survivor recalled returning to his home community, and he said, and I quote again, "I wasn't sure if I was a white person or an Indigenous person. People in my original community did not know who I was. All this time, I had thought I was a white boy." End quote. It's difficult for most of us to comprehend what the individuals of the 60 Scoop went through. I myself certainly cannot pretend to know. But I do know this. In our province, we are only as strong as our families. We are only as strong as our communities. Family and community. These are the bedrock institutions, the foundation of a strong Saskatchewan. We failed the survivors we heard from in the sharing circles, and so many others. We failed their families. And we failed their communities. We failed. On behalf of the Government of Saskatchewan, and on behalf of the people of Saskatchewan, I stand before you today to apologize. I stand before you today to say sorry. We are sorry for the pain and the sadness that you have experienced. We are sorry for your loss of culture and language. And to all of those who lost contact with their family, we are so sorry. There is nothing that we can offer that will fully restore what you have lost. What we can offer is the solemn assurance that government policies have changed, and they continue to change. While there are still too many First Nations and Métis children in care, today we work with 17 First Nations Child and Family Services agencies to deliver culturally appropriate child welfare services to our vulnerable children in over 60 First Nations communities. Whenever possible, we need to keep our families together. We have and continue to strengthen supports intended to maintain a connection to family and culture. When adoptions take place, we do and we need to strive to keep siblings together. We're working actively to recruit First Nations and Métis foster families. And we're providing cultural training to non-Indigenous foster families. But our preference, as a matter of fact, our goal is to have no children in care. Children should be cared for by their families in their communities. And that is why we continue to work with Indigenous people to strengthen our Indigenous families through employment and education, healthcare, and cultural programs, often delivered in partnership with First Nation and Métis organizations. We continue to increase our supports for basic adult education, both on reserve and off. We've increased funding to the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technologies. We have a strong partnership and relationship with the First Nations University of Canada and the Gabriel Demont Institute. In our healthcare system, cultural support programs for Indigenous people are being expanded and need to continue to be expanded, including wider access for elders and healers for our Aboriginal families. And this year, we will be strengthening addiction treatment programs in Saskatchewan, adding new treatment beds and expanding training for our counselors. Ladies and gentlemen, there is an earnest and concerted effort underway in our province of Saskatchewan to support and uplift all of those in need, including our friends and neighbors that are dealing with the impacts of the Sixties Scoop. Everyone in our province who is struggling, everyone in our province who is vulnerable, everyone in our province who is in pain and coping with physical and emotional distress, they deserve our help and they deserve our support. In Saskatchewan, we are one community, and we must comfort and support one another. And I believe that today, progress is being made in many areas. But there is so much more work to do. We have many miles to travel, many miles to travel. And my sincere hope is that we, together, can travel this road. Let me close where I began, with a heartfelt expression of gratitude to the survivors. We have learned so much these past months and years. You have lit the path forward by bravely sharing your stories. And my pledge to you today is that we will honor and respect your experiences. We will learn from your experiences, and we will continue to engage with you. And while we will never right this wrong completely, I believe that we can move forward with open hearts and a common purpose. Together, we can build a more compassionate Saskatchewan. Together, we can build a more respectful Saskatchewan. Together, we can build a stronger Saskatchewan for our children and generations to come. Thank you.